Hey, good afternoon, Nabin. It's great to see you. Excited to have the conversation with you today and learn a little bit more about Neural and help share the story with the broader market. To get us started, would love it if you could just kick things off and tell us a little bit about your founder's journey, some of the things that you did prior to starting Neural, and really the opportunity you saw that had you take this leap.
Absolutely. And thanks for hosting me, Brett, today. It's great to be here. I'll go back to my early career in Wall Street. So I was a CFO at Citi Alternative Investment Practice for many years. Basically, helped them build the business within the city after the financial crisis. And the team grew, and I managed global team, and I knew the pain of managing global people at that time, but it wasn't quite registered to me that I needed to start a company at that point. But then after leaving City in 2018, started a company called Harvest, which basically did a consumer fintech and early users of AI to help negotiate consumer debt with financial institutions with my co-founder at that time. And that company did well. It's a venture-backed company. We were doing, double-digit millions in ARR in 18 months after launch with a smaller team. So a company got acquired by Acorns in 2021. And we wanted to get back into like a payment space, right? And in between, I've also worked at a very large payroll company called TMF, leading their sales and strategy in the US, and got to see like very clearly what the infrastructure for global payroll and payroll in general looks like. And obviously there are lots of learnings from that. Obviously, the infrastructure in the payroll space is, one of the least disrupted space in the entirety. It's difficult, but if you can solve some of the problem challenges in this space, we'll have a really big business. So that's how it started, thinking about payments. What's the next big thing in the payments? We basically identified payroll is this one, and really built the new infrastructure for next 100 years. Because ADP today is still the largest company after 75 years, and there are several other companies like that in this space. So we really saw a tremendous opportunity to disrupt this space by building the infrastructure from ground up for the next 100 years. And our thesis has been in three things within the payroll. And the one is payroll, modernizing the payroll stack. And then basically have a platform that can, go from zero to IPO. That's really our thesis. So, even today you have amazing companies like Gusto and others that are super SMB, does not scale well. We wanted to build something that's global and that can scale from zero to IPO. That was number one. Second was payments. We saw in the US, payments is somehow integrated in the payroll, but if you look at the global payroll, it's completely different. Payroll processing and payment processing are completely two different things. We wanted to unify that and provide a much better, experience to customers. And then the last is benefits, right? As you know, even in the US, benefits is very complex. They're like your benefits in an administration platform that are multi-billion-dollar business. And in the global space, too, a lot of countries, have mandatory benefits, but a lot of companies are starting to provide, private benefits. And how do you make sure that that benefits becomes the part of a one stack that just works really, really well? So we focus on these three verticals. And then obviously our experience in using AI agents in our last company, we wanted to bring it to this, massive compliance and regulatory and tax compliance world to make things much, much easier for internal purposes as well as for clients. So with that in mind, we started in 2024, raised the seed round before we did anything, and really started to build the infrastructure for next 2.5 to 3 years, because we realized that everybody else in this industry just uses somebody else's stack. We wanted to be very, very close to the infrastructure and build our own. So it took a long journey. I think, we're crazy to do this for 2.5 to 3 years, but I'm glad we did it because now we're seeing the fruit of that hard labor that we went through and going through all of that brain damage to build the infrastructure that's really gonna, stand for next 50 years.
That's amazing. I want to hold on the gaps in the current global payroll offerings today. I'll tell you maybe my understanding, and I would love it if you would just kind of go even deeper and kind of give examples that maybe I'm not even thinking of. But to me, there was 5, 6 years ago, global payroll meant aggregation. It meant a single pane of glass, let's call it, but independent in-country processors that were doing things in a very discrete way, and then you were just hoping to kind of tie that together with a analytics tool that sits over those. It felt to me like some businesses in that 2018, 2020 range, whether it was Deal or Remote or Rippling, started to think about, let's not aggregate, let's try to put boots on the ground and start to own the infrastructure a little bit more. So one, is that accurate that some of those companies did take more of an infrastructure play? And if so, what is maybe different about your guys' more infrastructure play?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, some of those companies started to unify the global payroll platform, but a lot of the companies focused on the front end, right? You just give you a dashboard and aggregate some of the data reporting, but nobody really focused on the hard part, which is the backend stack, which is running, gross to net payroll, onboarding, payments, benefits layer. And that's what we really focused on. And also the gap that we saw is, a lot of the folks focused on the EOR, right? Which is, EOR and contractors mainly. And there's a whole another world when companies goes to another country, set up their own entities. There's like tons of, tax and legal and other compliance that comes with it. So we focused on the entire stack, right? So look, there are a lot of companies, they just do EOR today, right? And which is great product if you want to try out a couple of countries. But if you really want to set up your own operations, then you really have to figure out the entity specific payroll. And that is the hardest problem to solve in this space. And there have been a couple of companies who have done that, but the gap always has been they are very good internationally, but they never cracked the US, right? Think about even Deal and Papaya Global and all of these other companies that came way before. They did really well internationally. Nobody thought about the US, or they thought about the US, but it's just difficult to build in the US. Even my company TMF, used to provide this for large Fortune 500 companies, and US was always the missing part. And that's what we unified through our platform by building the infrastructure in the US, not just for the payroll, but also for PEO for smaller companies. And now we have one platform that can use for US payroll, US PEO, global payroll, EOR, and contractor with a single login. That is very rare to find even today.
You've talked a lot about like spending years building that infrastructure and really focusing on getting that base layer correct. And I think there's the technology layer that needs to be put in, but there's also sort of the compliance, local knowledge, the tax regulations. How do you build for that portion of it and not just for the, payment processing rails?
Yeah, great question. Look, I think, without AI, it would have been very, very difficult for us to build that stack, right? And I met a lot of founders, before starting Neural. They all attempted to, build payroll companies, and they all gave up after 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, because the nuance that you have to get it right to build those things, not just from a tax compliance and payroll processing perspective, but also the payments and the benefits and getting those pay and a salary paid in right time, right day, or right even within the hour. That's very difficult to build. So we use lots of AI in the background. And also in the US, if you look at how many tax jurisdictions in the US, it's like 23,000 plus tax jurisdiction. You have to get all of that information right. That's why it takes a long time to be able to build proper payroll tax engine in US and other countries. And with the help of AI, because we're familiar with how to build it, we do have human in the loop. So we were able to do that and then refine that for 2.5 to 3 years before we actually went to the market, right? Because this is one of the product where you can't go to market with like a MVP, hoping that people will buy it. They're not going to buy it, right? In the payroll, we used to call it like your age is the enemy, meaning the less number of years that you have experience in this space, you are not going to do well. So for us, that meant like, not only building, but refining it for, months and years before we actually went to the market to make sure that the tax calculation is accurate, the compliance is accurate, the onboarding is very, very crucial, as well as there are a lot of things around payments, whether it's authority payments, the pension payments in lots of different countries, right? There's lots of nuance around that. So it took us, a while to get that right, but that comes, we wanted to do that to make sure that when we go to market, we have all of these things figured out, and there's a lot of trust, that we ourselves can put into the system, as well as, we're gaining the trust from clients as we continue to onboard them.
Yeah. And when you talk about using AI and how that kind of allowed for a faster or making this possible when maybe it wasn't a couple of years ago. I think that makes sense to me on the speed side of things, but I think the knock on AI is obviously the probabilistic nature, the chance of hallucination. So I know you mentioned human in the loop, but are there other elements that you guys kind of bake in to make sure that we're not hallucinating or we're not having surprises down in the payroll stack?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, in our last company, Harvest, back in 2018, we built our own LLM engine because there's no foundational models available at that time. We're like a data labeling team that are continuously refining that model to get to like 95, 96%. In this industry, that's not even enough, right? You have to get it 99.999% accurate. So if you use like a Claude or some other, some other foundational model, maybe it'll get you to like 60, 65%, but there's the last, 30% you really have to build internally and refine it. So we built our own models, right? We obviously rely on external models as well to give us like notifications and all these other things. So, and we validate, across like many different things to make sure that that is the correct one to put it into our system. So there are lots of checks and balances that our AI was able to help us build internally our own models, as well as there are human in the loop for last 5%, because you have to do that to make sure that not only we do it ourselves, but we also work with consultants, consulting firms like accounting firms, to make sure that that is the right interpretation of some of those tax law changes before they get into the production, right? And that is really, really needed in this day and age, even with the open AIs and the clouds of the world, because the last 5% makes a huge, huge difference in terms of the tax calculations for payroll.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about some of the early customers and like, what they've gravitated towards. Before we do, just quickly, maybe I find it helpful to kind of talk in analogies. Is there like a vendor or a couple vendors that the market's familiar with today that someone could say, hey, we're Gusto, but we do this instead, or we're Rippling with this on top of it? Like, what would you describe Neural as using an analogy?
Actually, I got asked these questions a couple of times. It's very different because the way you should think about our stack is a more like an ADP, Oracle, and Visa. The reason I say those things is because that's how we built out the platform, right? So Gusto is really good for like super SMBs, and ADP is really good for very large companies and the smaller companies as well, right? And I think building in 2022 where the tech has advanced so much that we do not have to compromise for features as well as scalability, whereas a lot of the companies that built in the past had to choose one of the two, right? And which is what you see in this industry, because some of the Ripplings and the Gustos of the world now are faced feature reach, but they're not able to scale to the level of what ADP can do. And then same thing in the ADP, right? They're very much of a scalable platform for large companies, but they don't provide a lot of the features and a lot of the things that should be, standard these days, right? And so I would say like, look, ADP, but for companies that are starting out today to IPO, and we also are default. What I mean by that, default global, what I mean by that is we have a PEO platform in the US, right? A lot of the companies, it's very difficult to build a PEO platform. It's a compliance heavy thing. And then we also do employer of record, which ADP does not do. We also do contractor management, which ADP don't do in certain markets. We also do vendor payments, because for us, what's important is, because we built our payment rails properly, we no longer have to rely on some of these exemptions, like payroll exemption that our famous competitors rely on. So we can actually move money legally, regardless of type of employment model, as well as for vendors, right? So that allows us to not only help companies pay salaries, but also pay their vendors globally as well. So, if you think of that, you call it like ADP slash, deal plus bill.com would be a true analogy.
Okay. I like that. Yeah. I mean, deal was definitely coming to mind, but you mentioned that US was a gap for them, and they're building a product there, but I don't think it's landed and expanded in the market quite yet. But I think the unification of contractor, global payroll, and EOR. But you're saying take that US layer, add that to it. And so that's really useful. When you guys have now gone public with the product, what have some of the first customers look like? Is it organizations that are starting from scratch that want AI native? Are you guys supplanting certain systems? And if so, what are sort of the reasons that you're supplanting them?
Yeah, look, a lot of the customers are, tech companies that are growing, very, very fast. And I think, what happened to those companies look, we were all on that same bucket, in our last company as well. You hate having multiple vendors, right? Because then you have to integrate three different systems. For your 100%, 200% workforce, having multiple vendors within the same sort of like a product is a nightmare, because then, your accountant's going to charge more. You need a bigger finance team. You need to integrate with other accounting systems. So a lot of the early customers, started with one product. Like, our first product was contractor, then US PEO, then EOR, right? So they started expanding with us. In fact, so much so that our global entity payroll was the last product. They started coming to us like, hey, I'm setting up an entity in Canada. Can you guys help us? Right. And we're like, oh, we can actually help you. Like, this is actually coming down the pipeline. So that's how we've expanded. So it's always been, they'll come with one product. And now most of the times it's the US PEO, because that is the biggest pain point that they have. Right. And if you look at the US PEO market, still today, like 90% of the PO are powered by the same Prism HR system that was built in 1980s, right? And there's a lot of gap in terms of what they cannot do internationally, right? So if we solve the most pressing aspect of their stack, which is the PEO and the benefits, we were trusted to get everything else, from them, right? So we call it a primary vendor approach. So PEO is always a primary vendor. Your contractors in your one may not, because you can always move to a new platform and they can support that. So that's how our customers have been growing. Now the go to market has been, even though we have all kinds of product, the go to market has been focused on the PEO stack, just because that was the one that we saw, the one, dire needs in the market, PEO plus the global. And a lot of the customers, came through our PEO and continued to expand, right? Now they're moved out of a PEO to an ASO model with their own benefits. Our system is flexible enough to support that. Once again, like Prism HR backed PEOs cannot do that. So that's another, that's another segment of what we're seeing a lot of traction, because some companies would come to us like, hey, we're like 80 employees and we plan to be 250 next year. So this year PEO would work for us, but next year it does not, right? So that basically limited very few options, including Neural being one of those 2 or 3 options. So that also helped us really well to kind of focus a little bit on that segment where there's clear pinpoint.
Yeah, I think what we've seen in the PEO market is really a slow reaction to the global problem. I think JustWorks made an acquisition of Via a couple of years ago, but it wasn't a entire global footprint. It was more on South America. We saw Trinet announced a partnership with Multiplier, but it was embedded in, or an API and not actually native. So what can someone expect to kind of feel differently if they're looking at those companies that are kind of bolting on a global partner versus what you guys have done?
Look, I think, the partnership model has always been in place in this industry for many, many years, right? And, through the partnership model, there are a lot of restrictions, right? It's even from a onboarding, from a ongoing, like an experience, it's just very, very different. I think the way this industry will move forward is it needs to have a native, AI native, plus also one platform native experience. What I mean by that is being able to onboard people globally, being able to do PEO, being able to do benefits, contract. I think that's a basic, table stakes now for companies, because they just hate having 3 different platforms. So what PEO worked as a single product worked in the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years may not work as we going forward, because the company is just becoming more and more global. Even in the US, right? Before pandemic, companies, the payroll companies were built for like office locations. Now people are moving around, all over the states. That poses a challenge from a tax and other perspective, right? How fast you can onboard, how fast you can offboard. Similar thing in international market as well. People are moving around from one country to another country. That poses a different challenge. So if you're not a new provider and built your system flexibly enough to handle that complexity and mobility, you're gonna left behind. And I think that's how we have an advantage to be able to do that, and having a flexible model to be able to allow for a lot of those global mobility in our platform. I think that clients are finding that very, very useful, and we'll continue to see that being a very good differentiator for us.
Yeah, yeah. So, and you very much painted a thrilling picture, I think, of like this unified global stack. And I'm thinking through my own experiences running our business. I think the experience that we have, where we use a PEO platform, there's logging in and running payroll and all those sorts of things. But I think that the experience that maybe matters the most to me is when I go out to my mailbox, I get that IRS notice and it ruins my day when I see the IRS happen, because I don't know what's going to happen next. And I just take a picture and I send it to their team, and they say, "Oh, you don't need to worry about this," or "This is already taken care," or they handle it. I think that that service, that compliance, that element of the PEO in a lot of ways is what means a lot to me as the business owner. I think, how do you convey to a business that even as a smaller team that hasn't been in the market for dozens and dozens of years, that we can deliver in that area?
Great question once again, right? And if you look at the institutions that are supporting us, and they obviously, it's a, to get like a master plan with Aetna and Kaiser, it's a human, it's a big undertaking, right? There's a joke in this industry: getting a banking license is easier, but getting a master license with Aetna and then Kaiser is more difficult, because it's a supply and demand, and they just don't hand those out too easily, right? And what I think, we saw a lot of pain point is obviously that the compliance. So we have used AI to make the platform so intelligent that it flags things to them automatically. One of the things that we are able to do is, if you go to our platform, you can actually onboard employees and run payroll just by prompt, right? You don't even have to, hit any buttons. You can just, it will take you through a flow. What that does for you is it'll make you very, very compliant, because it's asking all of the right questions to whether hire, fire, offboard people, whether your expense policy or handbook and all these other things are compliant. We do have, HR people, but we also give these tools to clients to be able to do this automatically. Same thing on the benefit side as well. We built our own Ben admin and Ben selection platform for clients to be able to go through it now to recommend. It recommends different plans based on their unique circumstances, right? And that is the next level thing people are looking for, that intelligence that built in the platform, so that it helps them, rather than calling an expensive lawyer or HR professionals on the retainer. Now our AI is able to do a lot of those things at least 90% of the time. I think that's what people are finding out, that this is the experience that I'm looking for in a platform. And that's how we win over clients, right? And the fact that we work with Visa and JP Morgan and the Kaiser of the world and the Aetnas of the world, but at the same time, we're also able to simplify this process for them. And in hiding in different states, in different countries, or tax compliance, or any other things, our AI is doing 70% of the work, 80% of the work, and giving the human to solve the rest 20% of the problem is a huge, huge differentiator in this space.
As you were explaining that, I was thinking about a scenario last week where I'm our payroll administrator. I want to do a one-off bonus, and I'm in chat over here asking it the right way to do it. And then I'm going into our PEO platform and following the instructions. And so you're saying to just have those two be merged, and then all of a sudden you don't need this shifting gears. The system's going to do all the knowledge and all the guardrails to prevent anything from that shouldn't happen from happening.
That is one of the reasons why we went through with our infrastructure route, because if we have our own infrastructure, we're able to control what our AI can do, right? And today, we're probably the only executional AI in the payroll system. What I meant there is exactly that, right? You go in as you ask questions, and before you finalize, it'll actually go and run payroll for you, make payments, hire people, right? So you can actually take actions on your behalf based on what you prompted them, right? And that is not something that other companies where they're attacking on some others, stack, be able to do that. And I think that's going to be the differentiator. And as people get more and more used to, playing with Claude and OpenAI and ChatGPT, I think that is what they're gonna start to see more and more and start to, want more and more in this platform, right? Because look what happened with the mobile days, right? As people get more comfortable with mobile, they're doing everything on mobile, right? And now we're gonna, and the adoption of the AI is even faster than mobile, 10x faster than mobile. So I wouldn't be surprised in the next couple of years, the UI will completely change. It becomes more of a prompt first approach, and we're already there.
Yeah. So I know we've only got a few minutes left. The conversation's been flying by, but one of the things that you guys recently announced was Neural AI Labs. And I was just curious if you could expand on a little bit more of what that announcement entails.
Yeah, 100%. And look, I think there are other companies that are doing that as well in the legal field and medical field as well, right? And we consider ourselves to be, a little bit more pioneer in this space in terms of what we are able to do with AI in terms of HR, payroll, and compliance. And the reason to have a Neural AI Labs is to continue to, lead that, frontier within this domain and have a dedicated team of folks that are building long horizon agents, right? Today we're only running payroll. What if, you can schedule like in the US, like, dismissing people is easy, but you go to Netherlands, other countries that have separations that are draft. There's like, there's like conversations that you need to have, negotiations you need to have, right? So you want to continue to expand the horizons of what AI agents can continue to do in this space. We call it a long horizon agent. So we set up a dedicated team to be able to do that. So they will continue to advance what Neural can do for our customers. It will also continue to expand and help other companies that want to bring AI within this industry and, be a thought leader and leader in this field. And that's really what what we set out. The Neural AI will be able to do it in the future. And plus, look at, as the foundational model going to a specific domain, what happens is now they are pre-training, right? These models are all pre-trained based on available information. But for them to get from 70% to 100% for any domain, they're going to need something very specific to this industry to train on. So the concept of training gyms in the AI is already taken place in other industries. And we hope to be one of those for payroll, HR, and payment industry, and continue to help advance the use of AI and make these mundane things obsolete, and give HR and other folks more time to focus on building culture and other things that they're supposed to do in the first place as HR professionals, right? So the goal is to continue to enhance and accelerate the pace of innovation within HR and payroll, and bring a lot of innovation in this industry through Neural AI Labs.
Amazing. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I really appreciate you making time for it today. I think that AI and global are probably the two biggest stories in HR, HCM, payroll, PEO, whatever category you want to throw at it. And I think you guys are attacking the problem head on at the most foundational level, and that's a big challenge. I'm sure it's been a lot of work, but I think it's probably the only way to actually be successful too.
Absolutely, man. If somebody asked me to do this again, I probably would not do it. But I'm glad we did it, and we're here. But it's been a blast. Thank you for having me, and speak to you later.
Yeah, thank you, Nabin.